The storm came from the north, as real troubles always do, without warning and without mercy. The wind howled outside the windows of Skagafjordur airport terminal like a pack of hungry wolves surrounding the last island of warmth in a dead desert of ice. Snow pounded the windows like 1,000 tiny fists, demanding to let the cold in where life still flickered. Einar Johannesson took a drag on his cigarette, holding it by the open window of the control tower. The wind blew the smoke straight from his mouth, blowing it into the black maw of the night. 45 years of his life, 20 of them behind these radars, and he still couldn't get used to the Icelandic storms. They came like God's punishment, turning the civilized world into primordial chaos in a matter of hours. The coffee in his cup had long since gone cold. The third one that night, or fourth, he had lost count. The black liquid reflected the dead, green light of the radars on which only the ground surfaces crawled slowly. The sky was empty. Dead. Not a single bird, steel or alive, dared to challenge this hell. The lines at the corners of his eyes deepened as he squinted into the darkness beyond the window. Einar's face was like a map, furrowed by the roads of fatigue and stress. Each line told a story, of flights he had flown through storms, of planes he had landed at the last minute, of those he had missed. He pushed the thought aside. Not now. Not on a night like this. The threadbare wool sweater scratched the skin beneath his work vest. His jeans, old, faded with a patch on the left knee, were reminiscent of a time when he believed this job meant something. Now he knew better. Now he understood that they were all hostages. The passengers, the staff himself, all trapped in this glass and steel cage while nature decided their fate. The radio on the table came to life, cutting through the silence with the creaking of static. Einar, are you there? Bjarni Ingimarsson. The guard sounded tired. We have a problem here. Einar slowly put out his cigarette on the windowsill and picked up the phone. I'm listening. One of the stranded people is missing. A young guy, a backpacker, Lucas Fernandez, a Mexican. His stuff is still here, but he's nowhere to be found. Einar frowned, massaging the bridge of his nose. The headache was creeping up slowly, as it usually did after staring at screens for hours. When was the last time you saw him? About 2 hours ago, maybe 3. Asta says he asked her about buses to Reykjavik. In this weather. Einar shook his head. Has he gone mad? Tourists. Bjarni chuckled. They're all a bit crazy. I think he tried to hitch a ride on the highway, or he went on foot. He got desperate to wait. Einar looked at the weather station screen. Temperature outside, -12. Wind speed, 60 kilometers per hour, gusting to 80. Visibility, 0. Going out in such weather was tantamount to suicide. Check again. Toilets, smoking room, all nooks and crannies. Maybe he's sleeping somewhere. I've already checked. It's not there anywhere. The static swallowed up Bjarni's voice, leaving Einar alone with a growing sense of unease. He lit another cigarette, this time without opening the window. The smoke slowly rose to the ceiling, blurring the outlines of the familiar control room. Something was wrong. He could feel it in his skin, the same way he could feel a thunderstorm, approaching from the change in pressure. Experience told him that people didn't just disappear, especially on a night like this. He descended from the tower, his footsteps echoing in the empty corridors of the terminal. The neon lights hummed, like diseased insects casting a deathly white light all around. Somewhere deep within the building, generators hummed monotonously, maintaining the illusion of civilization in this god-forsaken place. The waiting room greeted him with a picture of modern purgatory. A dozen passengers were seated on uncomfortable, plastic seats covered with airline blankets. Some were sleeping, their heads on their travel bags. Some were staring blankly at their phones, which had no signal. An elderly couple were quietly conversing in German, occasionally casting worried glances at the snow-covered windows. In the corner of the room there was a bar, the only place where a semblance of normal life still glimmered. Asta Gudmund's daughter stood behind the counter, nervously polishing the same glass for the umpteenth time. A girl of about 30, with red strands escaping from her ponytail and tired eyes. She looked up when Einar approached. Espresso? she asked, even though she knew the answer. Double, he nodded. And tell me about this Mexican. Asta placed the cup under the coffee machine, which hissed, emitting a cloud of steam. Lucas? Nice guy. A student, I think. Traveling around Europe with a backpack. She handed him the cup. He asked about buses, about taxis. I said that no one would go in such weather. He was upset. And then what? Then, Asta was silent, wiping her hands with a towel. He went to the toilet. That was about 3 hours ago. I never saw him again. Has anyone else gone missing? The girl frowned. A businesswoman. Sarah Chen, I think, Asian, also looking for a way to get to the city. But she probably found a taxi. Asta didn't sound convinced. Einar felt an icy weight settle in his stomach. 1 missing was an accident, 2 was a coincidence. But his experience told him that there were no coincidences. Good evening, a pleasant voice said behind him. Einar turned. A man in his 50s was approaching the bar, impeccably dressed in an expensive cashmere sweater and a technical jacket that cost more than Einar earned in a month. His gray hair was neatly combed back, his face was well-groomed with soft features. He moved with the confidence of a man accustomed to comfort and control. Michael Sorensen, the stranger introduced himself, holding out his hand. From Copenhagen. Einar reluctantly shook the outstretched hand. The palm was warm, dry, with a firm handshake. Einar, air traffic controller. Ah, so you're the one keeping us here. Sorensen smiled. There was a slight Danish accent in his voice. Joking, of course. I realize that you can't do much in this weather. He sat down on the next bar stool and ordered a whiskey. Expensive single malt. Asta found the bottle on the top shelf. Awful night, Sorensen continued, warming his glass in his hands. I heard someone was missing from the stranded boats. I hope they're safe, though it's madness to be out in this weather. His words sounded right, full of genuine sympathy, but something in his tone made Einar tense. Maybe it was the over-rehearsed intonation, or the coldness in his eyes that didn't match the warmth of his voice. Did you know them? Einar asked. I saw them briefly. A young man with a backpack and a business lady. We exchanged a few words about the weather. Sorensen took a sip of whiskey. It would be a shame if something happened to them. Einar studied his face in the reflection of the mirror behind the bar. Sorensen looked calm, almost relaxed. Too calm for a man who had learned of missing persons. What are you doing? Einar asked. Business consultant. I work with medical companies all over Europe. Sorensen smiled. It's boring work, but it pays well. Einar finished his coffee and stood up. I need to go back upstairs. Check the connection. Of course, Sorensen nodded. I hope everything will be resolved soon. As he climbed the stairs to the control room, Einar couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. He turned around, but the stairs were empty. Only the sound of the wind and the distant hum of the generators broke the silence. In the tower, he tried to contact the Coast Guard, but the radio was silent. The storm was drowning out all signals, turning the airport into an isolated island. He looked at his watch, 2 in the morning. There were still 5 hours until dawn, but dawn would make no difference if the storm continued. Anxiety gnawed at him from the inside, like a hungry animal. He knew every corner of this airport, every door, every corridor. If people were disappearing, it wasn't through the main exit. Bjarni would have noticed. So there was another way. He took a flashlight and descended into the lower levels of the building. The service corridors were poorly lit, filled with equipment and boxes of spare parts. Einar methodically checked every room, every closed door. He stopped at the emergency exit leading to the gas station. The door was locked from the outside, as it should have been. But on the floor lay a forgotten backpack. It was worn, with patches, from different countries. He opened it. Clothes, a guidebook to Iceland, a passport in the name of Lucas Fernandez. Einar squatted down, shining the torch on the floor. In the dim light, he could see several dark spots near the threshold. He touched, one with his finger, sticky, almost black. Not mud, not water, blood. His heart began to beat faster. He stood up, looking around. The corridor seemed longer than usual, the shadows deeper. Somewhere in the depths of the building, something thudded softly, maybe pipes expanding from the heat, or maybe something else. Einar quickly went upstairs, but instead of going to the control room, he went into the waiting room. Most of the passengers were asleep, wrapped in blankets. In the bar, Sorensen was still sitting at the counter, now talking to an elderly German. He put his hand on the old man's shoulder, a friendly gesture, almost fatherly. But to Einar, it seemed possessive. "Berlin is beautiful in winter," the old man said in heavily accented English, "especially the Christmas markets." "I'll definitely visit," Sorensen replied. "Otto, right? I'll remember." Einar passed by, pretending to check the windows. Sorensen caught his eye in the reflection and nodded. There was the same warm smile on his face, but his eyes were cold, assessing. The clock showed 2:30 when Einar decided to try to sleep. He settled into the control room chair, covering himself with an old jacket. But sleep would not come. Every sound made him tense. The creak of metal, the rustle of paper, distant footsteps in the corridors. At 4 a.m, the radio came to life again. "Einar." Bjarni's voice sounded worried. "We have another problem." "What now?" "An old man, a German, Otto Weiss. He's nowhere to be found. The bed is untouched." Einar closed his eyes. "The third. No longer an accident, no longer a coincidence. Look for him. Everywhere. I'm going down." He found Bjarni in the waiting room. The guard looked confused. A large man in his late 50s, accustomed to simple problems like drunk passengers and lost luggage. "Asta says he went to the toilet around midnight," Bjarni reported. "No one else saw him." "And Sorensen? What Sorensen? Where is he?" Bjarni looked around. The Dane was nowhere to be seen. "I don't know. Maybe he's sleeping somewhere." Einar walked around the hall, checking the sleeping passengers. Sorensen was not among them. He went up to the VIP lounge on the second floor, empty. He checked the bar, also empty. Only Asta was dozing in a chair behind the counter. The growing sense of danger made him move faster. He went down to the basement, to the technical rooms that he knew like the back of his hand. The flashlight picked out familiar details from the darkness: heating pipes, electrical panels, ventilation shafts. He was about to go back up when he heard a sound, barely audible above the general hum of the machinery. Somewhere water was dripping, but not the rhythmic drip he knew. It was uneven. Following the sound, he reached an old utility room in the farthest corner of the basement. The door was slightly open. Einar pushed it open and directed the beam of the flashlight inside. At first, he didn't understand what he was seeing. His brain refused to process the information. Lying on the floor was Sarah Chen, the businesswoman who probably found a cab into town. But she wasn't going anywhere. She was never going anywhere again. What was left of her was carefully, almost surgically processed. The body was professionally dissected. The cuts were smooth and precise. Some organs were missing. Everything was done with medical thoroughness. Like in an operating room, surgical instruments lay next to the body, carelessly wrapped in bloody rags. Clamps, scalpels, something else. Everything glistened in the light of the lantern. The air was filled with the smell of rubbing alcohol mixed with the coppery stench of blood. Einar backed away, his stomach churning. He braced his back against the doorframe, trying to keep the nausea at bay. His hands were shaking so badly he could barely hold the lantern. Hunter. There was a hunter here. Professional, cold-blooded, working among them like a wolf in sheep's clothing. And he knew who it was. Einar switched off his flashlight and stood in the darkness, listening. A floorboard creaked somewhere above. Cautious footsteps in the hallway. Someone moving through the building. Someone who knew he was here. He made his way slowly, trying not to make any noise, to the stairs. Every sound seemed deafening in the dead silence of the basement. His breathing sounded like a blacksmith's bellows. His heart was beating so loudly that it seemed it should be heard at the other end of the building. When he got upstairs, he saw Sorensen at the end of the corridor. The Dane was standing with his back to him, talking on the phone. The voice was quiet, but in the empty corridor, Einar made out a few words. Yes, the quality is excellent. Tomorrow morning. Price negotiable. Sorensen turned, saw Einar, and calmly ended the conversation. Connection problems, he explained with the same warm smile. Trying to call the office. Einar looked at him, unable to utter a word. Before him stood a monster in human form, and this monster smiled at him as if he were an old friend. You look tired, Sorensen continued. Perhaps you should rest. The storm is getting on your nerves. Yes, Einar finally squeezed out. I think I'll rest. He turned and walked toward the control room, feeling Sorensen's gaze between his shoulder blades. Every step was laborious. His legs felt like lead. He locked himself in the tower and tried to contact the outside world again. The radio was silent. The phone line was dead. They were cut off from the world, locked in this glass coffin with a killer. Einar looked down at the waiting room, where unsuspecting people slept peacefully. There would be fewer of them tomorrow, or today. The clock showed 5 in the morning. He was no longer an air traffic controller, monitoring the safety of flights in the sky. Now he was the only person who knew the truth about what was happening on the ground. And it depended on him who would survive until dawn. Outside the window, the storm continued to howl like a hungry animal demanding victims, and in this godforsaken place among the ice and darkness it already had victims. Chapter 2. Red snow on gray asphalt dawn came gray and hopeless, like a funeral shroud thrown over a dead world. Einar had been awake all night, sitting in the control room chair with a crowbar in his hands, peering into every shadow outside the windows. His eyes were watering with fatigue, but every time his eyelids began to close, the mangled body of Sarah Chen floated before them. The storm died down slowly, reluctantly, like an enraged beast forced back into its cage. The wind still howled outside the glass, but the gusts became less frequent and the snow turned from a blinding curtain into a sparse sleet. Einar walked down to the waiting room, trying to look calm. Several passengers were already awake, stretching and complaining about the uncomfortable seats. Asta turned on the coffee machine, the sound seeming louder than usual in the morning silence. Sorensen was sitting by the window reading a book, an expensive leather-bound volume, something medical, judging by the anatomical diagrams on the open page. He looked up as Einar approached. Good morning, the Dane greeted. I hope you were able to get some sleep? Not really, Einar replied, studying his face for any sign of guilt or worry. Sorensen looked rested, fresh, like a man who had spent the night in a comfortable bed. I understand. Nights like these are hard on everyone. Sorensen closed the book. I heard another person is missing? An older gentleman? How do you know? People talk. Small community. News travels fast. He shook his head with an expression of genuine regret. We were just talking about Berlin last night. Otto was talking about his grandchildren. What a pity. Einar clenched his fists. The bastard spoke of his victims the way others spoke of the weather, with detached sympathy that was devoid of any emotion. Where were you last night? He asked bluntly. Sorensen raised his eyebrows in mild surprise. Here, in the hall. I tried to sleep in these terrible chairs. He smiled. And do you suspect me of something, Mr. Johannesson? Just trying to figure out what's going on. Me too. It's a very strange situation. 3 people can't just disappear. Although... Sorensen looked thoughtfully at the snow-covered windows. Anything can happen in this weather. People lose their minds, do stupid things. Panic is a terrible thing. Every word he spoke sounded reasonable, logical. And that was precisely why they disgusted Einar. He knew he was looking into the face of a monster, but this monster was too smart to show its true nature. Asta approached, then with a tray of coffee. Einar, can we talk? She looked worried, her face showing signs of a sleepless night. They moved to the bar. Sorensen went back to reading, but Einar felt that he was listening to every word. I saw something strange at night, Asta said quietly. About 2 o'clock, someone was walking along the lower corridors with a lantern. It could have been Bjarni, or me. No, not you, I know your voice, and it was someone else. He spoke quietly, almost whispering. In English, with an accent. Einar glanced at Sorensen, who had turned the page, completely absorbed in his reading. What did he say? Something about prices, about quality. As if he was bargaining with someone. Asta froze. My God, do you think he... I don't think anything, Einar said quickly. But be careful. Don't be alone. He knew his suspicions might seem paranoid. He had no direct evidence, only a dead body in the basement that he couldn't talk about without becoming the prime suspect. It was the dispatcher's word against the word of a respected Copenhagen businessman. Around 10 o'clock in the morning, the wind had almost died down. Visibility had improved enough that the outline of the runway could be discerned. Einar contacted Keflavik Airport Services, the first successful connection all night. We'll send snow removal equipment soon, they told him. In 2 or 3 hours, the strip will be ready for work. Rescue was close, but Einar knew that much could happen before it arrived. Sorensen had probably heard about the possible resumption of flights too. He had little time left, which meant he could become more aggressive, less cautious. Einar tried to follow the Dane discreetly, but the Dane seemed to sense his gaze. Sorensen moved around the terminal with casual confidence, helping an elderly couple find a phone charger, engaging in general conversations about the weather, even offering to help Asta distribute the sandwiches the airline had sent. What a nice person, said one of the passengers, an elderly teacher from Germany. In such difficult times, it is so important to maintain humanity. Einar barely restrained himself from laughing hysterically. Humanity. If only she knew what that nice man had done in the basement a few hours ago. Around midday, what Einar feared most happened. Asta disappeared. Bjarni found him in the control room. Asta's missing, the guard said, and for the first time there was a note of real fear in his voice. She went to check the storage room in the basement. That was half an hour ago. Einar felt a chill spread through his body. Not Asta. Not her. Where is Sorensen? Downstairs in the hall. He suggested organizing a search. He says he knows how to search enclosed spaces. He served in the army or something like that. Of course he offers to help. The wolf is always ready to help the shepherd look for the lost sheep. Einar came down. Sorensen stood in the center of a group of anxious passengers explaining the search plan with military precision. We need to split into groups, he said. 2 at a time, check each room. Mr. Johannesson, you know the layout of the building better than anyone. Perhaps you could start with the basement? A trap. He wanted to lure Einar into the basement, away from people, where no one would hear the screams. Good idea, Einar said, trying to keep his tone calm. But let's go together. 2 people are safer. For a split second, something flashed across Sorensen's face. Disappointment, irritation, but then he smiled. Great idea. Together we'll cover more territory. They went down to the basement together. Einar had brought a crowbar with him, saying that it might be needed to pry open the locked doors. Sorensen did not object, although his gaze lingered on the improvised weapon longer than usual. The basement. Corridors seemed even more sinister, with daylight filtering in through small windows near the ceiling. Their footsteps echoed loudly off the concrete walls, creating an echo that could mask the sound of others. It's a scary place, Sorensen said, looking around at the rows of pipes and cables. It's easy to get lost. Yes, Einar agreed. Or hide something. Or someone. They reached the far end of the basement where the room with Sarah Chen's body was. The door was closed. Einar pushed it open, holding the crowbar at the ready. The room was empty. No body, no tools, no blood. Only the faint smell of bleach and rubbing alcohol suggested that it had recently been thoroughly cleaned. Is something wrong? Sorensen asked, watching Einar's reaction. No, nothing. But Einar knew. Sorensen had moved the body, perhaps burned it in the boiler room, or dismembered it and carried it away in pieces. There was no more evidence, It was just his word against the word of a respected businessman. They continued their search, checking every room. In one of the storage rooms, Einar found what he was looking for, and what he was afraid to find at the same time. Asta was lying on the floor, bound and gagged, but alive. Her eyes widened in horror when she saw them. She tried to say something, shaking her head frantically. "Thank God we found her," Sorensen said, but his voice was different. The warmth and concern were gone, leaving only cold calculation. Einar turned to see a heavy wrench in Sorensen's hands. The Dane was no longer pretending to be a worried tourist. His face had become a mask, calm, efficient, frighteningly rational. "You've ruined so many of my plans, dispatcher," Sorensen said, approaching slowly. "I was hoping to work quietly. The old man's kidneys are excellent for his age. The Asian's liver is a godsend. But you were too nosy." "Why?" Einar asked, clutching the crowbar. "Money? Money, of course. But not only that." Sorensen smiled, and that smile was more terrifying than any rage. "You see, the world is full of superfluous people. Tourists who waste resources on pointless journeys. Old people who cling to life. Migrants who are of no use to anyone. And their organs. Their organs can save valuable people. Productive people. You are a sick bastard. I'm a realist. And an entrepreneur." Sorensen took another step forward. "There's always demand, especially for quality organs from healthy donors, and places like this godforsaken airport are ideal for the job. Isolated, minimal witnesses, no communication." Asta tried to scream through the gag, desperately twitching in the bonds. "Don't worry, my dear," Sorensen said to her. "You have a young liver, healthy kidneys. Someone very wealthy will get a chance at a new life because of your death. That's fair, don't you think?" Einar realized that the conversation was an attempt to distract him. He jerked to the side just as Sorensen swung the wrench. The blow landed on his shoulder, but not on his head. Pain shot through him, but he stood. Einar swung the crowbar, aiming for his chest. Sorensen jumped back, but not fast enough. The metal caught him in the ribs, and he groaned. "That's stupid, dispatcher," he hissed. "I'm a professional. I've killed more people than you think." They circled the cramped space of the storage room, like two predators preparing for a decisive battle. Sorensen was stronger and more trained, but Einar knew every corner of this building, every pipe, every ledge. The Dane attacked again, swinging the wrench like a mace. Einar ducked and the blow struck the heating pipe above his head, sending sparks flying. He retaliated with the tire iron, but Sorensen caught his hand. They grappled, falling to the floor among the boxes and rubble. Sorensen was the heavier of the two, and he leaned on top of Einar, trying to reach his throat. His fingers were strong, professional. The fingers of a surgeon, accustomed to precise work. Einar felt the air leaving his lungs. Black spots danced before his eyes. He found a piece of the broken box with his hand and drove it into Sorensen's shoulder. The Dane howled in pain and loosened his grip. Einar pushed him away and rolled to the side, gasping for air. Sorensen rose, clutching his shoulder from which blood was seeping. "You're only delaying the inevitable," he said. But for the first time there was uncertainty in his voice. "Even if you kill me, who will believe your story? A paranoid dispatcher who accuses a respected businessman of serial murder. They will," Einar answered hoarsely, rising to his feet. "Because they will find your tools, your notes, your clients." "They won't find it," Sorensen smiled through the pain. "I'm too careful." But in his eyes, Einar saw what he was looking for: doubt, fear. Sorensen knew the game was over, that his methods were no longer working. The final attack was desperate. Sorensen rushed forward, trying to knock Einar down and get to the crowbar. But he was wounded, tired, and his movements had become predictable. Einar backed away, let him come closer, then kneed him in the solar plexus. Sorensen doubled over, and then Einar hit him in the back of the head with the tire iron. Not much, not fatal, but enough to knock the killer out. Sorensen collapsed to the floor and lay motionless, blood pouring from the wound on his head, mixing with the dust and dirt. of the basement floor. Einar hurried to Asta, untying her bonds with trembling hands. She sobbed as he removed the gag from her mouth. He killed them all, she whispered. I saw, in the refrigerator, parts of... I know, Einar said, helping her up. It's over. But when they looked back, Sorensen was gone from the floor. Only a dark stain of blood showed that he had been there. Where is he? Asta began. The sound of footsteps in the hallway gave them their answer. Sorensen was wounded, but not defeated. And now he was even more dangerous. A hunted animal with nothing to lose. They climbed out of the storage room, supporting each other. Einar looked over his shoulder, expecting to see the bloody figure of his pursuer. But the corridor was empty. At the top, they were met by Bjarni and a group of passengers. What happened? The guard asked, seeing their condition. Sorensen, Einar said. He's a murderer. We need to find him and... Who are you talking about? Asked one of the passengers, an elderly German. Mikael Sorensen. Danish. There's no one here by that name, Bjarni said, frowning. I checked everyone when I checked in. Einar stared at him. It was impossible. Sorensen was here. He was talking to him, fighting. Look at the registration cards, he asked. Bjarni brought a folder of documents. Einar frantically flipped through the pages. Lucas Fernandez, yes. Sarah Chen, yes. Otto Weiss, yes. But no one named Mikael Sorensen. Maybe he didn't register? Asta suggested. Then how did he get into the terminal? Bjarni shook his head. All entrances are monitored. Einar felt reality slipping from under his feet. Either everyone had gone mad or Sorensen was so professional that he could erase the traces of his presence, or he was never here. The sound of approaching helicopters interrupted his thoughts. The rescue service had arrived with snow removal equipment. Soon the airport would be open again, the people would fly away, and this night would become just a terrible memory. But when rescuers searched the building, they found no bodies. No Lucas Fernandez, no Sarah Chen, no Otto Weiss. It was as if they had truly walked away into the night and disappeared into the storm. Einar sat in his chair in the control room, watching the last plane disappear into the gray clouds. Asta was in hospital, needing medical attention for the shock she had suffered. The official version was that she had tripped in the basement and sustained a head injury that had left her hallucinating. Hallucinations. That's what they called what they experienced. Einar knew the truth. He had seen the bodies, seen the blood, fought the killer. But there was no proof. Sorensen, or whoever claimed to be him, was too professional. He had not only removed the evidence of his crimes, he had erased the evidence of his existence. Outside, the window, snow was starting to fall again. Large, slow flakes that promised another storm. Einar lit a cigarette, looking out at the empty runway. Somewhere out there in the world beyond this damned place, there lived a man who turned people into commodities, who preyed on the weak and the lonely, exploiting their fears and despair, and who always remained in the shadows, invisible, elusive. Einar picked up the phone and dialed the police. Not for the first time these days. He would tell them again about the missing people, about the suspicious Dane, about what he had seen in the basement. They would record his testimony again, conduct a formal investigation, and close the case for lack of evidence. But he will tell. Again and again, because the truth does not disappear because it is not believed. It is just waiting for its time. Meanwhile, Skagafjörður Airport was falling silent again, bracing itself for another storm. And Einar Johannesson remained at his post, the only witness to a nightmare that officially never happened. Outside the window, red snow slowly covered the gray asphalt, hiding the last traces of that night when people became prey, and the truth turned out to be too terrible to believe.